emergencies and disasters, we are not technically actually emergency responders. So we're more of disaster managers. So we spend a lot of time doing disaster preparedness, disaster response, disaster recovery, and disaster mitigation. As a part of all of those different tasks, we do everything from writing emergency plans for the county or the state, making disaster policies. So working with elected officials to have good response policies, good government policy. We also work quite a bit on checklists. So when we have that hurricane, tornado, flood, whatever that is, who's doing what? And what does that responsibility look like before we have the flood that comes down? On top of that, response, so we coordinate with partners. So instead of being boots on the ground, which we're going to talk a little more in detail in the next slide, we're more of the orchestrators, right? Kind of the organizers, the supporters, and we try to work with police, fire, EMS, dispatch, public works, Department of Environment, anybody you could think of that would respond and help them respond in one direction as opposed to a chaotic, sporadic direction. So we do this through briefings, through a variety of different techniques that FEMA has kind of put together over the years with being able to do research on what effective disaster management is. We also do recovery, so the process of doing damage assessment and making sure that our communities have the resources they need to rebuild. And then lastly, just mitigation. So again, mitigation gets overlooked a lot, even though it is really important. But it is our job as emergency managers to put together mitigation programs, plans, applications, and then hopefully funding so that we can do things like build flood walls or remove vegetation or big actions that help us not have the disaster in the first place. We have studies that actually show that every $1 that we spend on disaster prevention or mitigation saves us $6 or more in what we would spend responding to a disaster or recovering. So mitigation really is kind of that golden area of emergency management. But we definitely need to spend a lot more time on that because a lot of us get a little caught up on the preparedness part and the response part. So I want to go a little more into what emergency management is and what value it brings in terms of meteorology, the science, and how we can kind of work hand in hand with those two things. So with preparedness, again, I mentioned emergency planning. So if we were able to just wait and not put together a plan and just respond, the response would be very chaotic, right? We have a lot of research that shows that if we're caught in a situation and we haven't thought it through, or we don't have any kind of well-structured response, that we're going to be kind of deer in the headlights a little bit, right? We're not going to be able to think clearly. It's going to take us a while to really put all the facts together and have a good approach. And it's also going to cause us delay, which puts more lives at risk. So we have a lot of different personnel all over the country working in local, state, and federal emergency management that are doing this work. Meeting with partners, talking to nonprofits, private sector, all of the different groups who would be responding, and putting together formal plans that we can review and work on when we have the disaster. After we do the plans, we provide training on it. So it's important that, again, all of our colleagues in first response, environment, public works, all of those folks know what the plan is. They were a part of the planning process, they're trained on it, and that we're reviewing it and ready. This is really important because around the country, you'll see that some places have disasters a lot more than others. So, like Florida and hurricanes, they are very well practiced with hurricane response because they often get a lot of landfalling hurricanes, as opposed to Maryland, where, we get some tropical activity up here, but it's not as common. So for us, we have to do these trainings and these disaster drills or exercises to make sure that we remember the plan that we made. It helps keep us on our toes. It helps keep us we're fresh and ready. And it also helps us test the plan so that if there's an error in the plan or there's some kind of issue with the plan, we can correct the plan and have the best plan for when we have that catastrophic disaster hitting the area. On top of those things, which are already quite a bit, we do supply inventory, making sure that our local, state, and federal partners have the supplies that we might need. This could include food, water, emergency contracts, debris equipment. It could also include generators, making sure like our fire stations have power and backup power, dispatch centers with backup power. Um, so we spend time that. And then lastly, building relationships. So making sure that we're in tune with what our community looks like, who's in our community, what are the community groups? So houses of worship, community clubs, educational groups, and working with all of them to not only, again, do outreach and have a positive relationship, but also bring them into the fold of how we would respond. If you look at Hurricane Helene or any recent disasters around the country, you'll see that there are quite a bit of different agencies and groups that are required for a response and recovery process. Helene had hundreds of different nonprofits, different community groups, volunteers, and then on top of that, local, state, and federal entities who are working together to not only respond to the crisis out there, but also work on the recovery. And we have found that it's really, really effective if we build the relationships with our communities before the disaster, rather than waiting, so that we all know each other, we trust each other. And for me as an emergency manager, I know exactly who to call if I need help with like hot meals or sheltering or all of those things. So we do that. On the weather side, we do a lot of situational awareness. So taking briefings from the Weather Service, taking a look at weather data, weather forecasts, trying to not be caught off guard, because it's our job to make sure that our community is ready for the weather that's coming in. And then also, too, as the government, we need to make sure that we can respond effectively and timely. So there's a constant monitoring of information as we await the future risks and hazards. And then response. So, like I mentioned, we're not the boots on the ground. We're not doing rescues. We're not in boats or on fire trucks. We're working with them to have a really solid response. So, for us, our job is to activate the Emergency Operations Center. So, you'll see on the slide that that's an example of a EOC that's located in Florida doing a little bit of hurricane response. And the beauty of that EOC is the fact that every one of those people in there have some kind of association with either a nonprofit, an agency, a private business, or an entity, and they're all there to work together. So all of us have a little bit of a different puzzle piece of what we're dedicated to do during that disaster, whether it's alert and warning, or again, opening shelter, providing food and water, all of those things. And for us, it's really important that when we have all these puzzle pieces and all these groups, we all have to be on the same page by working in the same place, sharing information, briefing, having calls, and then also talking to each other. Without that EOC up and running, we would be very siloed, we would be very redundant, and our response would be very chaotic. Some neighborhoods might be seen by multiple different groups. Some neighborhoods might not have anybody come out and help them. So, as emergency managers, we're overseeing that. We're also helping manage the resources that the public need, resources that our public safety partners need. We're sending out emergency alerts with alert systems, planning evacuations, and helping first responders evacuate people during that. And then lastly, we're also documenting, which is really important, because disasters are very financially costly. And so we need to have good documentation, not only on what we're spending as a government, but also what we can qualify for in the event that we're able to get federal assistance or money back to support the response. And then recovery. So mentioned damage assessment a little bit, but most importantly for us and for our communities, we can't qualify for a declaration from the federal government or any kind of aid or support if we don't meet a certain threshold of damage. And so it's really important as emergency managers that we're working with different entities again to go out and do a really good damage assessment so that we can do really good estimates so that we can enhance our opportunity to get aid for people for recovery. If we don't have good emergency management practices in place, if we don't have good trained people to go out and do the federal requirements for the damage assessment, then our communities will suffer because we won't be able to qualify for any of that. And then, unfortunately, all the recovery is going to be either on the backs of their insurance or on different nonprofit groups who might donate aid or give money. So we oversee those processes as well as debris management, super costly. And then two, just documentation, because anytime that you have multi-million dollar projects on infrastructure or things like that, it's important that we're keeping track of all of that. And then mitigation, like I mentioned, it's important for us to try to reduce disasters. And as emergency managers, it's our job to have the mitigation plan, do project coordination, do grant management, and try to get grants from FEMA and from the federal government in terms of mitigation monies. And then also put it to use. So doing things like preventing people from building in floodplains, right? Doing zoning ordinances, trying to build barrier construction like flood walls, like in the picture, also clearing the land in wildland areas, things like that. So with that, the local role honestly is threefold for us. Our focuses are making sure that we're one, taking into consideration the safety of residents. So, what do residents need to do to stay safe? How can they prepare their property and protect their families? What do they need to be provided to be safe? So, shelter, food, water are always the essential. Power, access. For recovery, it might be internet so that they can start to contact insurance companies or just start walking through some of the recovery processes, which can be lengthy. And then also the closure of areas. So, in the event that we have a hurricane or a storm, typically we have a lot of dangerous areas afterwards. Power lines might be down. There could be hazmat, chemical spills, things like that. So making sure we work with our first responders to evacuate those areas and then keep people out until it's safe again is our number one priority. Number two is going to be public property. So making sure that we're taking a look as a county of what our county property damage is, taking a look at county infrastructure, roads, utilities, and then also making sure that we're still collecting information on public or private property so that we can submit for the private aid that we could potentially get with a federal declaration. It's really important to say potentially because a lot of folks think typically that you get a federal disaster with all disasters. And it's just not always true. You have to reach certain thresholds, like I mentioned before. But it is our job as EMs to make sure that we try to collect that information the best we can. And then lastly, continuity of services, which is really important. So making sure that your city or your county or your state continues to provide the services that we've been providing, even after we've had a disaster. So that could be 911, making sure that when you call for help, you get someone to answer the phone and then you get a fire truck or a medic unit to show up to help you. It also could be, again, roadways, making sure transportation systems and roadways are open for your use. And then lastly, just making sure that you can do what you need to do. One of the biggest challenges is issuing permits and different permitting for rebuilding after a disaster. Sometimes that can be really lengthy, especially if you have a lot of different processes in blue sky days. But it's our job to make sure that post disaster, we try to speed up the process so that people can rebuild their homes or rebuild their businesses as fast as possible to get back in normal times. So That is also one of our big goals. And I always love to discuss this a little bit because there are a lot of misconceptions in the disaster world about who has the responsibility for emergency response. And so, like I mentioned, I work in local level, so city or county emergency management. Every city or county has someone in charge of emergency management. And then you also have state emergency management, who oversees all disaster response for the state. And then we have FEMA, or our federal emergency management agency, who comes in and helps. But what I like to say is a lot of folks don't think about how important your local emergency management office is and your state. And technically, with the Stafford Act and with our disaster law, it is actually our responsibility as a city or a county to do emergency management on the local level to the best of our ability. So we're actually in charge of the disaster when we have a disaster. We make the calls or the shots, and then when we run out of supplies, resources, or we need help because it's catastrophic, we reach upwards. So we might ask the state to come in or send us resources. They'll come in and assist us if the disaster is too big for the state. So they do all they can to help us. Then they reach up to FEMA, and then the federal government comes down and offers a variety of different resources, personnel, things. Typically, what you see is we'll have a disaster, and a lot of fingers may be pointed typically towards FEMA on their response or other things. And it's not always fair because technically, when FEMA comes in, they're going to ask the local government and the local emergency managers what the plan is, what the direction is, and how they can help us. Because again, based on the Stafford Act and the way the disaster law is set up, it is our responsibility. And I know there's been a lot of talk about restructuring of the disaster system. So it'll be interesting to see where that all goes, but it's just important to know your local emergency management office, your local plans, and what your cities and counties are doing to lead your disaster response, because they're going to be the ones who are coordinating and in charge of all of that, from preparedness to recovery. So getting to the weather part. And the most coolest thing of weather and emergency management and the intersection is the fact that we really do have the same mission. So I kind of wear two hats. I've got my meteorology weather forecasting hat, but I also have my disaster management hat. And I will say that we are two people of the same mission and the same love of keeping people safe from weather. So, taking a look at our partners with the National Weather Service, they actually have recently updated their strategic plan over the past 10 years to be driven to helping emergency management. So, how can they produce forecasts or information so that local officials, elected officials, and emergency managers can make a good call on evacuation? How can they provide briefings and products so that we know when to open our emergency operations center, or we know when to start doing like snowplow checks, right? Or we know when to staff up for a big blizzard. So we really do have the same missions. We live in that same world of making sure that we're trying to keep people safe from weather as well as property. And it's really cool because as NOAA and NWS approach this new mission, they're really working hand in hand with us every day to just enhance weather resiliency and also weather preparedness around the country. And the most interesting thing is we've actually done a little bit of research on the number of different disasters, and by disasters I mean federally declared that meet threshold. And we have almost 80% of disasters as of 2014 that are considered weather related. So 80% weather, 20% other things like, like cyber attacks, terrorism, those kinds of things. That means that it's even more important that we have this intersection between weather and emergency management, and the hand-in-hand action of making sure that we're using science and data and those things to do things like disaster prevention, management, all of that. And as an emergency manager, we are actually expected to kind of be weather experts, even though a lot of our disaster managers don't typically come from that background. Usually, when you're in a local emergency management office, you are expected to provide forecasts, either pass on the weather service forecast or the data, or give a heads up on what's coming. You're expected to pass that on to police, fire, public safety, typically your elected officials. So they might actually give you a call and say, hey, I see this hurricane on the Gulf on the news. Like, what do you think about it? And you have to be able to communicate that. Also, we have an expectation to make sure that the government and the schools are aware of the timing, because they might have to make operations decisions. Are you going to open school or close school tomorrow? We're typically at the table for that. And again, there's kind of that responsibility of being a weather expert, to provide the information to the folks who need to make those decisions. Also, we have to send a lot of alerts and do a lot of social media awareness on storms coming in. So that's, again, another responsibility that falls under our offices typically. And we're really lucky to have NWS as really good partners. But we're also seeing a huge trend in meteorology and earth sciences people graduating, getting degrees, and coming over into emergency management because it's just very relevant, to have that background and be able to apply it. So, not all storms are a disaster. And this kind of is a segue from talking about how we have 80% of our federally declared disasters in the country as weather related. Not all of them meet the threshold, though. And so weather becomes a disaster when we typically see these things that you see on the screen. One, we might have a large need for emergency response resources and coordination. So, as I mentioned before, we have a huge group of people who might be at risk of injury or death from a storm. We also might have a response that might need multiple agencies, multiple organizations, multiple businesses all working together. So, we call that coordination. For multiple agencies, even if you just take a look at, typical weather response, we have everything from local, state to federal government just working the system, right? Um, we have a lot of different entities and agencies that we work with at the federal level too. And all of that requires coordination across all these different agencies with all different responsibilities and all different policies. We also typically will see a disaster if it's a complex threat, or the response needs are complex, or it requires complex solutions. So you might see, like, for instance, Texas, when they had that freeze in 2021. That was a very, I would say, uncharacteristic weather setup. It was definitely, um, I don't want to say the word unprecedented, but it was a little unprecedented. And so that kind of response and that kind of threat for them, really heightens the opportunity, or the outcome of it being a disaster, because they're not used to having that kind of freeze. The infrastructure might not necessarily be set up for that. And the response that you're going to have might be complex because you don't have the resources specific to, sub-zero temperatures and all of those. So that's a great example of a complex threat. Also, large media interests. So it's really important that our public information of what we're doing, but also what people need to do, are able to get out the door, through our media partners, through social media, and through all the different ways that people get information. So typically, when we have a large media interest, from national media all the way down to local media, it adds to complexity because we have to make sure that we're working well with the press, and also doing press releases, and just making sure that we're also providing that information. Also, cost thresholds. Like I mentioned before, we can't always get a disaster if it doesn't meet the thresholds. And the thresholds come out yearly. Usually it's based on different things, different regional economics, cost of living, property estimations, things like that. And then lastly, economic interruption. So typically every year We have areas around the country that might have drought or extreme heat or storms, and it can cause quite a bit of damage to crops, farming, agriculture. A lot of folks forget that that's technically actually a disaster, and we have programs with like USDA as well as some stuff on the FEMA side where we can assist farming, agriculture, and deal with economic disasters like that. Because one good drought can lead to quite a bit of losses, especially in the heartland of the country where they're producing a lot of different things that we need. So, weather needs for emergency management. So, as somebody coming out of weather, we have so many different observations and data and cool science stuff that we can use to revolutionize how we do disaster response. And we're definitely improving with this with time, especially since we're working a lot with the Weather Service now. Um, Many folks are going to emergency management conferences and taking different presentations or classes in weather, and really building that background. But we need more weather data and data driven decision making in our field to help us just progress and get a little better at being proactive with decision making with weather. But currently, we have these three areas where weather data and weather science is really playing a huge role in enhancing our disaster efforts. So the first one is weather data, forecasts, and observations. So, like I mentioned before, we can't be ready as a city or a county or a state if we don't know the weather's coming. So many of us either have assigned personnel who it's their job to check the forecast, stay aware, look at the data every day, get text messages for watches, things like that, so that we don't get caught off guard when we have a storm. For situational awareness, we have current conditions where we can pull weather observations from the Weather Service, but also from different systems of mesonets around the country so that we know what's coming. We also know the current conditions if maybe those conditions could be impacting safety, like with fog or with heat or with humidity or even cloud decks, things like that. We also have an ability to do projected precipitation outlooks, either with forecasts from the Weather Service, but also with other data that, if you have the science background, you can use. This is really important because we have a lot of flooding in this country, especially in the Maryland area. And it's really important to keep an eye on your projected precipitation so that, again, you can lean forward. Maybe you can do a sandbag drive if we have rain coming in. Or, for instance, like last weekend when we had the nor'easter, a lot of places that are vulnerable to coastal flooding typically are very used to doing sandbags along the coast and along those businesses that flood a lot. But if you don't look at the projected precipitation or the different crests and things like that, you're not going to be able to do those preventative actions and you're going to be caught with losses. We can also look at satellite imagery, which is awesome. And satellite is basically just a bird's eye look at everything from humidity layers to fog and visible satellite, which shows the clouds. That can be really valuable if you're doing air operations, if you're doing search and rescue, and again, with the cloud decks, knowing if you can get air operations to the right level you need it. Or lastly, wildland fire. So NWS and other scientists have been using different kinds of satellite imagery to detect hotspots and smoke plumes during high-risk wildfire days. And in Oklahoma, in Texas, and California, there have been times that monitoring the satellite has helped public officials be notified of fires before they got a call in to dispatch, and they were able to take care of it faster rather than just waiting for the fire to blow out of control. And that's a really cool thing that NWS has been helping a little bit with, is keeping an eye on the satellite and giving EMs a call when they see that. Outside of situational awareness, emergency planning, so using data to do threat assessment. What's our history of storms in a certain area? What are we the most vulnerable to based on what atmospheric conditions we normally get? Um, how can we use data to build weather exercise scenarios that actually match what we would see? Um, what's the climatology of the area? Again, what are the trends that we've seen for decades, and what's considered abnormal or normal? And when we're looking at abnormal or normal, how does that go hand in hand with our critical infrastructure, our power grid, our water systems, all of those things? And then lastly, historic storm reports. So I think this is super important because as an emergency manager, if you're truly going to prepare, you want to know the history of what happened in your county. You want to know what your worst storms were. You want to know the highest amount of storms you get so that you can lean forward in that and you're using data to know what you're truly at risk of. And that's a huge benefit, especially with planning, so that you don't get caught off guard again for something that maybe hasn't happened for 100 years. Um, the only caveat to historic, though, is you don't want to be stuck too much on the past because, as we see with the atmosphere, a lot of things have been changing. Some folks are getting different pattern shifts and different things at different times now. So it's important to stay tuned to the history, use the history, but keep up with current trends too, so you don't get caught off guard of that black swan or that weather event that you weren't used to seeing. And then, so community programming. So weather data is important. It's important for the operations, the planning, and the readiness that we need to have. But like I mentioned in the beginning, the presentations, the relationships, the talking to residents is actually more important. And I'm a big believer in community programming because, again, we do a lot of stuff in emergency management, but if we're creating programs or we're offering recovery services and our residents don't know about us, they're not going to be able to take advantage of it. They're not going to be able to be helped. And then we're not going to recover as effectively. So these are really great weather resources that NOAA and NWS have been working hard to promote as a part of their Weather Ready Nation initiatives and their mission to save lives and protect property. But as emergency managers, we have adapted a lot of these and adopted, and we're trying to push more of these things out because it also helps us, right? So, for instance, we have what they call the Weather Ready Nation program. And with that program, they have a ton of different seasonal weather safety campaigns, free social media graphics, free videos, all of that NOAA and NWS has put together. It's all science based, which is great. It's all also like very, I would say, artistically designed because not all of us have a lot of time to do that when we're doing all the other stuff. So we can use it, the community like it, it's engaging, and we can teach more on weather safety for the storm, but most importantly, leading up to a storm when everybody's tuning in, looking up information, trying to get ready. Community reporting. I'm really passionate about the concept of community science and community reporting because we really need information from what's happening in different yards at different places in your neck of the woods for us to do our job right. I always like to compare it kind of to, calling in and reporting to 311 when there's a pothole. We can't fix the pothole unless we know the pothole exists. And a huge part of that is getting a call or getting a community report. It's similar to the 911 system. We can't send a police unit, a fire unit, or an EMS unit to help someone if we don't get a call or a report that something is wrong. So just like with that, with weather, we need community to call in and tell us when there's a funnel cloud or a tornado forming. To call in and tell us, hey, this bridge is underwater, or this road should be closed because it's flooded. We need those reports too of property damage. Like, hey, my house just got hit by wind and now I don't have a roof anymore. The sooner that we can collect that information, the faster we can mobilize our emergency plans and start to open shelters and do what we need to do. So we spend a lot of time using these programs to train the public, I know my office, we offer Skywarn classes where people can learn how to identify funnel clouds and severe storm signatures. I know that's really helpful, especially out in the center part of the country where they get a lot of tornadoes, a lot of hail, and stuff like that. We also have Coco Ross, which I'm going to talk a little bit in the future, but it is basically rain gauge reporting. So, how much rain did you get over the past 24 hours? And that is important because we want to know like our soil moisture content, and we want to know who got pockets of rain because it could be a flood concern, right? And then we also have programs like VOS and observation stations where people install official observation stations in their backyard. They report what weather's going on directly to the Weather Service, and that's data that we can use not only for modeling and other things, but as EMs, we can use that again as what's going on in the community and do we need to do something about it. And as you can see, this is just a highlight of the Skywarn program that I mentioned before. So typically, NWS will come in, teach a bunch of really cool slides and cool information on how to identify storms. Your emergency management or your fire department will host the class. We bring in community members, and then we have a list of these Skywarn certified folks that we can call during storms or even let them know ahead of the storm forecast that we would like them to keep an eye on the sky. Really helpful for damage reports, really helpful for awareness. And Skywarn has also helped NWS warn tornadoes and other severe storms faster because we have a lot of limitations with what we can see on radar and on the data. There's not always clear ways to see that the tornado's on the ground. And so this program really helps us leverage community input and participation to help us save lives faster. Coco Ross. So, like I mentioned before, this is the rain gauge network where this is purely volunteer. All these folks have their own NWS Coco Ross gauge. They are supposed to report their numbers before 7 a.m. every day. And it's really helpful to see because it helps us collect where the rain fell. Um, Again, we have a lot of really great technology where we can do estimations, or we could take a look at like the rainfall intensity and the DBZ that we had and try to estimate the amounts of rain, but it's not always accurate. So that's where we also put observations and community reports in to compare it with the rest of the data and see if it's really accurate. As you can see, some places are a lot more dense than others. So the more Coco Ross stations you have in your county, the better off you are because you get a better picture. And NWS really relies on it because they're very limited in how many observation and weather stations and gauges they can install and fund. So this data really helps them fill in the gaps and helps them have a better idea of the impacts too. We have this really great program, Weather Ready Nation Ambassadors, where we're actually partnering with the private sector. So NOAA and NWS is trying to get as many businesses on board as possible, where they're taking a pledge to be more weather safety aware. They're training their staff in how to be weather safety, and then they're also helping push like outreach projects or also making good weather decisions for their business to help us and to help NWS. It's a little stagnant of a program now, but I do think that they're going to revamp it. And I'm hoping too that they'll work a little bit with us in emergency management so that we can really leverage just the awareness of this program to them when they're making decisions. As like with snowstorms or floods, or even like with the nor'easter, we notice a lot of community members are kind of strapped to what their workplace says they have to do. So, for instance, like I can put out as an emergency manager, please stay off the roads in the blizzard. But if workplaces are going to force people to go into work or not have like telework options or not have any solutions to that, then we're going to see more people on the road. So it's definitely a partnership. And I think after COVID, it's been really interesting to see a lot of the private sector really embrace weather preparedness and emergency preparedness. And we see a lot more of those virtual telework days on bad weather than we used to, which really helps, our fire departments and our police departments and stuff like that, because it's just less rescues they have to do during the day. And then lastly, instant decision support. So this is when, the rubber meets the road, we're doing disaster response and we're using weather data and information to do our job. So NWS gives us everything from oral to graphic briefings, really great estimations of what to expect. They actually have an IMET program where they deploy meteorologists across the country. Some might go to fires, some might go to floods, hurricane response, you name it. When they can't deploy in person, they do virtual. So if we were to have storms, we could call NWS and have kind of an assigned person to help give us those required data triggers and different things that we would need to make decisions. And it's really cool too because they also do this for special events. So I know everyone's talking about the World Cup next year. We also have a variety of different really big events, Super Bowls, all of that. All of that requires a lot of emergency planning on our end, but we also are really worried about weather during that because we have a lot of people out there. So they can assign and deploy meteorologists to help us with that. And we can also leverage some of the different technologies they provide with NWS Chat or INWS. So I know I'm almost out of time, but I always want to wrap up my webinars or my presentations with ways communities can take action. So as an emergency manager, like I mentioned before, we are really working hard at the local level to try to educate more on local emergency management. A lot of us sometimes are kind of buried within fire departments. We could be in a sheriff's office. We could be in a police department. Sometimes you could even be in a public works department as an emergency manager. Or in bigger places, you could be an entire office. So, like at Prince George's, we have an Office of Homeland Security and Emergency Management where we are our own agency. But what we've learned is because we're kind of buried most times, not everybody knows their local emergency management office or their state. And it's really important that you do so that who's your emergency manager, what plans are they doing in your community, what mitigation are they doing? Are they providing different like drills or outreach events to help educate you and your neighborhood on what's going on? If you were to have a disaster today and you lose your home, where are you going to go to get the help? All of those things. So I really encourage everybody to research who your emergency manager is at your local level because they're going to be the ones that are there before the disaster and then also, a year or two into the recovery when your state help or your federal help might go home or go to the next disaster. Also, structure. What's the budget of your local office? What's the staffing like? What are the projects they're working on? All those are really important. I know that a lot of people are passionate nowadays about disaster prevention and mitigation, but you can't know what mitigation projects are being done unless you know what their plan is or you're active in kind of understanding what your local government's doing about mitigation. Lastly, information. So I encourage everybody to be familiar with your local alert system. So county, city, what system are they using? Are you signed up? Please sign up. We usually only see about 10% of our population signed up on our emergency alert systems. And we definitely want to see more because when we're sending out evacuations or any kind of information during a response, we want the information to get to you as fast as possible. So take a look at that, sign up. And then, of course, take a look at your household and workplace planning. So always kind of consider what your emergency plan is for your home. What's your communication plan for you, your family? What's your shelter and evacuation plan look like if you need to evacuate? Or what's your plan if you just lose your home? We support a lot of different like large multifamily apartment fires and other things where one day you have a home and the next day you don't. And it's really not only traumatizing, but also stressful to not have a plan on what you might do in that circumstance. Are you going to stay with family, friends? Do you have like emergency funds for hotel, things like that? So it's good to have those plans now so that when that happens to you, you can just do what's in the plan. You don't have to worry about it and be stressed out and think about it. You can, cope with what's going on and then enact the plan that you already have. We also highly encourage insurance checkups. So keep in mind that if you have homeowners insurance or renters insurance, you are not going to be covered for flooding. Not 1 inch of flooding, not 2 feet of flooding in your home. If you do not have flood insurance and you get a thunderstorm, you get a hurricane, you're not covered. And this is a huge deal because we see a lot of places in very flood vulnerable areas not have a lot of flood insurance rates. I think like in the Houston area with Harvey, they did a study afterwards and it was like, I don't know, 20 to 30% had flood insurance. So that's 70 up to 70% of folks that flooded did not have it. And it's really costly. So please take a look at that. For workplace and school emergency plans, always ask, what's the plan? Your county and your city emergency managers help and work with businesses. We help work with schools, but typically school districts will have their own emergency management lead. They'll have their own emergency management plans. They'll also have their own way of how they would evacuate children and reunify them. So please make sure that you ask what that plan is. And it's always a good idea to ask because if they don't have a plan, then maybe it will spur action, right? We see that a lot, like not only in schools, but also like recreation places, right? Campgrounds, etc. It's always good to just ask and know what the plan is. And if there's not a plan, then maybe you can help take the lead with that. Or the more parents that are asking, the more they might see it as an important front burner issue. So please do that. And then, like I said, get involved. So make sure that you're signed up for all of your government sources and alerts for emergency information. Always check the weather forecast every day, just so you know what's coming, so you can be ready personally. And if you could, it would be great if you could volunteer and learn emergency skills like CPR, stop the bleed, different Red Cross classes, and then also community emergency response team skills. These skills are valuable to have, but really during a disaster, everybody kind of has to jump in and help. And we've seen that a lot, even with Helene and other recent disasters around the country. Community members want to help, and they do. And so it's great to have skills to do that so that you can keep yourself safe, your family safe, and help give back to the community if you would like to. So with that, that's pretty much all I have. So I just want to thank y'all so much again for giving me the opportunity to give this webinar. You can find me on a variety of different professional social media accounts. I'm really passionate about EM, so reach out if you've got any questions, but thank you.
Ashley, well, thank you so much for the presentation. It's greatly appreciated. I see that a lot of folks are commenting. It was very helpful. Does anyone that is still online have any questions? If you want to raise your hand, I can sort of call on you to, since we're a relatively small group, you can just unmute yourself and ask your question if you wish, or you could send something to the chat if you like. Does anybody have any questions or follow-up? So actually, I actually had two questions. I just wondering if you could give us an update on the current situation with the government shutdown, the feds, FEMA. I thought I read somewhere they were going to eliminate FEMA. Just wonder if you could give us a little update about what you see as the impacts of what's going on at the federal level.
Yeah, so with the shutdown, I think it's important to state that even though some things are shut down, a lot of disaster services are considered essential. So in the event that we have disaster today, tomorrow, or we have recovery operations or disaster response ongoing now, FEMA is there to assist local and state folks. So that is a good thing. In terms of the changes, there's quite a bit of back and forth that are going on. I will say, I know earlier this year they closed like the emergency management FEMA training academy. which a lot of us go up to Emmitsburg in Maryland and take classes at. But they were able to reopen it, I believe, in June. So we have our training back, which is really important. And I know too that while they propose a lot of changes to like the existence of FEMA, a lot of that's actually being reviewed through the FEMA Advisory Council or the FEMA Review Board Council that they have created. And they've appointed a couple of state emergency management directors too, as well as some other elected officials to review it. I believe they've had like 3 different meetings just talking about different needs and all of that. So nothing has really come down yet. But as a local emergency manager or anybody in the emergency management space, we're kind of just keeping our ear to the ground and seeing what changes there are. A lot of our associations are doing a good job of also sharing the information of any changes. Um, Oh, and I will say there has been changes to mitigation. So, for instance, one of the grant programs I know they did eliminate, but we still do have other mitigation funding opportunities for now um, to use. So,
Okay, great, thank you. And just the other question I had, when you were mentioning about the Weather Ready Nation, WRN, it looked like it was sort of community-based monitoring. And I know sometimes we've had issues when we've used air quality monitors. People have asked the question about how representative is that data? Is it good quality data? Is it worth doing? I wonder if you could comment on that.
for sure. So, I think it's only is worth the amount of time that you put into like the community science training program. So, for instance, we've seen a lot of success with Skywarn because it's a multi-hour class that people have to take. And we try to keep people engaged by either sending them additional information or making sure that they're retaking the classes, annually. So they're getting refreshers. So we have seen success with Skywarn. I don't know necessarily about Coco Ross in terms of gauge reporting, whether or not it is like super accurate. I know that I typically will use it with the rest of the data and kind of see how it fits with some of our official gauges that we have like that. But it would be interesting to vet it and see how accurate it is. But I will just say, as an EM, I tend to prefer having some sort of information over nothing. So I would rather weed it out than not have it because it's a gap in that operational knowledge that you might need if something is going on.
So you basically don't just give people a gauge and just send them out there and do whatever you want kind of thing. They get some kind of communication or training.
Yes, 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 yes. And I will say too, the gauge is actually the same one in the picture. This one, that's the required gauge. So NWS has made sure that they're using the official gauges, not like some kind of like, cup with a ruler kind of thing. But they have a whole community network where yeah, they provide the information and all of that for them and try to keep them engaged.
Oh, interesting. Okay, great. Does anyone else have a question that they would like to ask?
I'm sorry, this is Susan Weirman. Hi, Ashley. Thank you so much. This was really great. Um, uh, you said, I think at the beginning when I first got on that you're wrapping up at the county. Where are you going?
Yeah, so my last day is tomorrow, but I accepted an opportunity to be the emergency management coordinator or the director of Gillespie County in Central Texas.
Wow.
I'm really, really excited because Gillespie County is right next to Kerr County where they had the catastrophic floods this summer. So it's an opportunity for me to go back to Central Texas, but also work through some awareness and preparedness and recovery stuff in an area that was hit really hard and tragically. So, yeah, I'll be kind of going back to my Texas roots a little bit, but taking a lot of really great connections and things I've learned from the Mid Atlantic there.
Well, we're very lucky to have had you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions Tiffany, go ahead. Did you have a question?
I did not need to indicate I had a question, but I will, I put in the chat some additional AWMA Chesapeake Chapter events we're having this fall, including a trip to the Baltimore Museum of Art to see 2 air quality exhibits on November the 2nd at 2 p.m. and also another in-person event in December on the 16th to the National Academies to do a tour. So we really appreciate everyone jumping on and listening to this excellent presentation. Thank you so much, Ashley, for the information. Makes me wonder sometimes, like, okay, do I just kind of Google to see where I should be registering for this emergency, information? I actually live right next to Ellicott City, Maryland. I'm in Catonsville, Maryland. So I experienced catastrophic flooding in 2016 and 2018, including, having Serve Pro trucks up and down the street and being visited by insurance agents that had just visited in Texas for Harvey. So we actually were able to get insurance money because our sump pump kept up, but our sump pump was running, but the water was coming in too fast. But I do encourage everyone to look at their insurance because you never know when you're going to be impacted.
Yeah, so just real quick, I worked for Baltimore County for a couple of years, and I believe you're in Baltimore County, right?
Yes, Catonsville, right next to UMBC in Baltimore County. Yes.
Yes, so that's going to be your go-to. So definitely check out Baltco Alert, and then just plug into their fire department and then also their emergency management on social media and stuff. But I am very aware of some of those flood issues because I know they had some debris management challenges, like with cars coming down the river into the county and stuff like that. So
yeah, it was pretty severe.
Okay. All righty. Well, I think we're out of time. So thank you, Ashley, so much for your presentation. It was a great presentation. And thank you, everyone, for attending, for your interest and time. And it's greatly appreciated. And we look forward to seeing you at some additional future AWMA webinars or events. So thank you, everyone. And I hope everybody has a great day. I did record this presentation. Ashley, I'll provide a copy. I did accidentally start it a few minutes late. I apologize for that. But I did record it, and we'll look about how we can distribute the recording to anybody who may be interested. But thank you so much, everyone, for your time, and have a great rest of your day.
thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Bye.
Bye-bye.